Tonight, let your shoulders drop a little. Let the room settle. Imagine the soft glow of a small oil lamp beside you, the kind that once flickered in thousands of homes across ancient Greece. Its light is warm, gentle, almost shy, and it moves the way a calm breath does. Nothing urgent, nothing loud, just a steady invitation to rest. Before we step into our first myth, take a moment to notice the air around you. Maybe it's still. Maybe there's a tiny draft like a wandering breeze from long ago, drifting over a stone courtyard where fig leaves rustle softly. Somewhere in that old world, a storyteller clears their throat, not to perform, but simply to pass the time until sleep arrives. That's the pace we'll keep tonight, unhurried, warm, and a little dreamy around the edges. You're welcome to close your eyes if you like. The stories won't need your full attention. They're meant to be listened to the way one watches waves at dusk, calmly, without expecting anything grand. If your thoughts drift, that's perfectly fine. In fact, that's the idea. So let's begin, not with heroes lifting mountains or gods shaking the sky, but with quieter myths, the kind that slipped through cracks in the temples, traveled along dusted footpaths, and settled in the everyday lives of people who simply needed a moment of wonder before falling asleep. 3 stories, each soft in its own way. The first takes us to a tiny village near the foothills of Mount Othrys, a place so small that most maps forgot it existed. Travelers rarely stopped there unless they were tired or lost, and even then, they often continued on, convinced nothing interesting could happen in a place with only 2 streets and 1 fig tree that everyone claimed was older than time itself. But the villagers knew better. They said the fig tree had a spirit living inside it. Not a dangerous one, nothing like the tempests of Zeus or the unpredictable moods of Dionysus. This spirit was gentle, almost sleepy in nature, and spent most of its time humming quietly to itself. If you sat under the tree long enough, they said, you might hear a tune drifting through the branches, something soft and shapeless, like a half-remembered lullaby. They called the spirit Thessa. No great goddess, no legend carved into marble, just Thessa, the fig tree muse. Some said she was once a nymph who wandered too far from her grove. Others whispered she had been a minor goddess who accidentally slept through most of her duties and slowly faded into local memory. Whatever she had been before didn't matter much anymore. In this village, she was simply the guardian of slow evenings and cool shade. Children often napped beneath her branches. Farmers took their midday rest there. Even the old shepherds, who pretended not to believe in myths at all, found themselves stopping for a moment to lean against her trunk. Somehow, the air around the tree felt softer, the breeze kinder, as if Thessa smoothed out the sharp edges of the world just a little. One summer, a traveler arrived, an elderly man carrying a small harp worn smooth from years of playing. He didn't speak much, but he had that look of someone who had wandered far and lost track of why he'd started in the first place. The villagers offered him bread, olives, and a place to sleep, but he simply nodded and settled beneath Thessa's branches, letting his back sink into the bark. Perhaps he meant to rest for a moment. Perhaps he meant to stay a night. But something about the tree, its quiet hum, its shade, its patience, made him close his eyes. And as he drifted into sleep, the harp at his side gave a tiny tremble, as if responding to the breath of the spirit. The villagers noticed this, but no one spoke. There was an unspoken rule. What happened under the fig tree belonged to the tree. Later, a shepherd boy passing by swore he heard two melodies, one from the old man breathing slowly, and the other from the tree, steady as a distant tide. They wove together like threads, neither competing nor leading, just gently circling one another in the warm afternoon stillness. Whether the man dreamed of the tree or the tree dreamed of the man, no one ever knew. But from that day on, the harp carried a new softness in its sound, and the villagers sometimes heard it echoing faintly through the night, a small myth, barely large enough to fill a lantern's glow. But sometimes the quietest stories settle deepest. And now that we're warmed up, let the evening stretch a little deeper. Let's wander to a new place where a different myth waits, still sleepy, still gentle, ready to unravel at its own unhurried pace. If your breath has settled into something softer by now, you're right where you need to be. This next story moves like water, slow, patient, and a little reflective, the way moonlight stretches over calm waves. Imagine yourself walking along the coastline of ancient Greece, the air cool and salted, the sky a ribbon of fading gold. Far out, the sea sighs against the rocks, and each wave seems to say the same quiet thing: rest. Tonight, we wander to a small fishing town perched along the Aegean. Nothing remarkable happened there, or at least nothing the gods would brag about. No heroes fought for glory, no monsters lurked offshore. The most dramatic thing that usually occurred was a stubborn goat wandering into someone's herb garden. But the villagers had a legend they whispered only after sundown. A gentle one, carried like a lantern from one generation to the next. It was the story of a girl named Lisa, a keeper of lights. Lisa wasn't a priestess, nor a seer, nor anyone touched by the divine. She simply had a quiet way of paying attention to things other people overlooked. The tilt of a fishing net drying in the wind, the silver flicker of minnows near the pier, the way the sea changed color when storms approached. She noticed details so small they hardly seemed to matter, but sometimes it's the small things that become threads in a myth. Every evening, when her village settled in and shutters closed for the night, Lisa walked along the cliffs carrying a tiny clay lantern. It wasn't magical, just handmade by her father, a fisherman with hands roughened by salt and rope. But the light it cast was warm and steady, reflecting off the sea like a promise that someone was awake, someone was watching. She said she lit the lantern for the ones who wander, which her neighbors assumed meant sailors, or perhaps the occasional merchant arriving late. They smiled at her gentle habit, but didn't think much of it. Greece had many customs stranger than this one, but what no one knew was that Lisa's lantern wasn't meant for mortals. High above the sea, in the deep hush between the sunset and true night, she would sometimes see shapes moving on the horizon, shapes too tall to be men, too quiet to be ships. Sea spirits, she believed. The old stories called them thalassoi, children of the waves who guided winds, shaped currents, and carried whispers along the tide. She'd never spoken to one, never even been close, but she sensed them the way you sense someone stepping into a room, a shifting in the air, a presence that wasn't threatening, just aware. One night, as she set her lantern on the cliffside, a storm rolled in much faster than it should have. The sky darkened to ink. The sea rose in restless swells. Fishermen hurried to secure their boats, pulling their nets like anxious parents gathering children indoors. Lisa stayed where she was. The lantern flickered wildly, its little flame leaning away from the wind. Something in the storm felt too sudden, too sharp. And then she saw it, a long shadow moving through the water, cutting through the foam with impossible grace. Her heart stilled. The stories had been true. A thalassos was rising from the deep. He emerged where the waves met the rocks, tall as a mast, his skin the color of river stone smoothed by centuries. Barnacles clung to his arms like bracelets, and seaweed draped his shoulders as though the ocean had dressed him. His eyes glowed faintly, not bright, just enough to be seen in the stormlight, like reflections on wet sand. He wasn't feared. He wasn't worshipped. He simply was. Lisa didn't run. She held her lantern as steady as she could, even as the wind tried to snuff it out. The spirit watched her quietly, head tilted, as if surprised by the fragile glow in her hands. "You kept this lit for me," he said, though his lips never moved. His voice came like a current slipping through rocks. Lisa swallowed. "For whoever wanders." The waves calmed almost shyly. A gust of wind softened into a breeze. The storm paused, as though listening. Mortals, he told her, rarely lit things without wanting to be seen. She smiled, small and nervous. "Maybe I only hoped someone would." The spirit stepped closer, not threatening, not looming, just present, like the sea itself. He touched the air above the lantern, and the flame straightened, steadying in defiance of the wind. Not brighter, just calmer, a quiet gift. The spirit didn't stay long. Such beings rarely did. But before he slipped back into the deep, he said one thing more. "Keep lighting it. Some of us forget the way home." And with that, he vanished beneath the waves, the storm melting into a gentle drizzle, as though embarrassed by its earlier temper. Lisa returned to her village with the lantern cupped carefully in her hands, and though she never spoke of what she'd seen, she continued her nightly ritual. Years later, old fishermen swore storms were kinder around their coast, and travelers said that even on the darkest nights, the cliffs glowed faintly, as if a small flame guided more than just mortal eyes. A quiet myth, nothing grand, but sometimes the softest stories stay with us the longest. And now, let's drift a little deeper into the night, toward our third sleepy tale, one that begins not by the sea but among mountains where mist curls like old memories. If your breathing has settled into something warm and steady, you're right on track. This next story moves a little like a mountain path, gentle curves, steady slopes, nothing abrupt, nothing sharp. Just a slow climb into a quieter world. Tonight we follow an old trail through the foothills of central Greece, where the air always seems a bit cooler, the grass a little sweeter, and the clouds linger low as if they're in no hurry to drift anywhere else. It's the kind of place where silence isn't empty. It's simply thinking. People who lived in these high villages believed the wind had moods. They said breezes were like passing guests, and gusts were old spirits with places to be. And sometimes, when the winds grew especially gentle, barely enough to stir a blade of grass, the villagers would say, "Ah, he's awake tonight." They meant a shepherd named Telion, not the usual kind. Telion wasn't known for driving flocks or mending fences. In fact, no one could quite remember seeing him with sheep at all. But he lived in a small hut on the slope overlooking a valley where the wind never roared, never chilled, and never shattered the stillness. It always moved softly there, as if respecting someone. Talion himself was as quiet as the air around him. His beard was long and silvered by age, his cloak patched neatly from years of use, and his eyes held that gentle, faraway look of someone who spent more time with the horizon than with people. He rarely visited the village. When he did, he spoke kindly but sparingly, as if each word were a small seed he placed carefully into the conversation. He had a talent no one fully understood. When Talion walked, the wind followed, not swirling like a tempest, not whistling like a storm, just a soft, steady breath of air that drifted behind him like an old friend. Children found it comforting. Goats, for reasons unknown, adored him. Elders gave him respectful nods, as though greeting someone who had lived many lives before this one. No one remembered where Talion came from. "He was already old when I was a child," one villager liked to say, and others nodded, though no one could explain how that made any sense. Time didn't behave around him quite the way it behaved around everyone else. One autumn, when the leaves turned bronze and the days shortened like gentle sighs, a young girl named Fira climbed the mountain path carrying a small basket of herbs. She was new to the village. Her family had arrived from the coast after a long season of poor fishing, and she had heard the stories about the man who lived with the wind. Curiosity has a way of taking young people up mountains. When she reached Talion's hut, she found him sitting outside, hands folded in his lap, face turned toward the valley. The wind circled him softly, brushing past him like a familiar pet. He didn't turn when she approached. "Hello?" she said shyly. The wind stirred like it had heard her speaking before he did. Talion smiled. "It's a quiet day for climbing." Fira shrugged. The mountain didn't feel as big today. "Ah," he said, nodding as though she'd confirmed something he already knew. "It does that sometimes." She hesitated, then held out the basket. "I brought these. My mother says time helps clear the mind." He accepted it gently, as if herbs were something to be handled with reverence. "Thank you. The winds will enjoy this." Fira blinked. "The winds?" Talion chuckled softly. "Everything in nature likes gifts when they're given in kindness." She sat beside him, feeling the calm settle around them like an extra layer of warmth. The valley stretched wide before them. The hills rolled like sleeping giants, and the air barely moved, just enough to brush her cheek. "Why does the wind follow you?" she asked at last. He considered the question for a very long moment. The kind of pause that wasn't awkward, just thoughtful, like a stone taking its time to roll down a hill. "When I was very young," he said slowly, "I could hear things others could not. Whispers in the rustling of leaves, warnings in storms, songs in the winter, drafts under doorways. And one night, when a great storm nearly swallowed my village, I spoke back. Not loudly, not bravely, just honestly." "What did you say?" "That I was afraid." The wind shifted around them, softening, as if remembering. "And the storm answered," Talion continued. "It quieted, only for a moment, but enough to guide people to safety. After that, the winds listened." He sighed gently. "And I learned to listen back." Fira watched the way the breeze tugged at the edge of his cloak, playful, fond. "Do the winds talk to you?" she asked. "Not in words." He gestured toward the valley. "They talk in temperature, in direction, in weight. And when they don't speak at all, that has meaning too." They sat in silence for a while. A hawk drifted above them. The sun dipped behind a cloud shaped like a rounded shield. The breeze dusted the grass with tiny movements. Fira finally asked, "Are you a spirit?" He laughed, a small, warm sound like distant chimes. "No, just a man who pays attention." Years later, when Fira grew older and the village had become her true home, she often climbed the mountain to sit beside Telian. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. But every time, the wind gathered there lightly, gently, as though unwilling to disturb the peace they shared. Villagers began calling Telian the Shepherd of Quiet Winds, though he never claimed the title. It simply fit him like a comfortable cloak worn through many seasons, even long after he passed, if he truly passed at all. The wind on that mountain stayed soft. Travelers said it felt like walking through a sigh or a memory. And when children stood at the cliffside, the breeze would sometimes wrap around them like an arm, or perhaps like a greeting. Not all myths roar. Some murmur, some drift, and some simply sit beside you until the world gets quieter again. And with that, the night deepens, ready for the next gentle tale. If your body has begun to feel heavier, like it's slowly sinking into the mattress or the chair you're resting in, that's perfect. This next story moves quieter still, like the hush inside a workshop late at night, where clay waits patiently for hands that shape it. We're staying in Greece, of course, but drifting westward now toward a valley where the mountains loom tall and the villages are tucked close to the earth, as if trying not to bother the sky. In that valley lived a potter named Lysandros, not famous, not mystical, just steady. His workshop sat near a stream, and he kept the windows open so the water's soft chatter mixed with the rhythm of his shaping wheel. The villagers said he made the best cups and bowls for 3 days' walk in any direction. But that wasn't why he was remembered. Lysandros had a quiet habit that people found strange at first and comforting later. He talked to shadows. Not in a wild way or a dramatic way, just conversationally, as if greeting old friends passing by. When he opened his shop in the morning, he would nod to the dim corner near his wheel. When sunset stretched long fingers across the walls, he would murmur a simple good evening. If a lantern flame wavered and cast a different shape, he'd pause to smile at it, as though recognizing a visitor. Children found this fascinating. Adults found it odd, but elders understood. Greece had always been a land where the boundary between the seen and unseen was thin, not frightening, just delicate, like a veil stirred by a passing breeze. One summer evening, when the cicadas buzzed lazily and the heat of the day still clung to the stone road, a boy named Petros wandered into Lysandros's workshop. He was young enough to be curious and old enough to wonder whether curiosity was a good idea. "Why do you talk to shadows?" Petros asked. Lysandros didn't look startled. He rarely did. He finished smoothing the rim of a bowl before answering. "Because sometimes," he said softly, "they answer." Petros looked around, half expecting a whisper from the dark. "Shadows don't talk." "Not with voices," Lysandros agreed, "but everything in this world says something, if you're quiet enough to listen." The boy frowned. "Like what?" The potter wiped his hands on a cloth. "Clay tells me when it's tired, water tells me when it's cold, fire tells me when it's hungry, and shadows," he gestured toward the corner, "shadows tell me stories." Petros shifted closer. "What kind of stories?" "Old ones," Lysandros said. "Ones too soft for priests to write down. ones that drift between the cracks of daylight. That answer didn't make sense to Petros, but something in the potter's calm voice made him feel as if he were standing at the edge of a pleasant dream, not understanding, but not needing to. Lysandros pointed to a wall where the lantern cast a gentle glow. "Do you see that shadow there? The long one that looks like a crooked branch?" Petros nodded. "That shadow visits every summer," Lysandros said matter-of-factly. "I think it belongs to an old olive tree that once stood here. Perhaps its roots still remember the shape of this house." Petros stared at the shape. It didn't move, didn't speak, but somehow it felt less like darkness and more like a memory stretched thin across the wall. "Do shadows always stay silent?" he whispered. "Not always," the potter said. "Sometimes they flicker. Sometimes they settle in a different corner for no good reason. That's how they talk." Petros didn't fully understand, but he believed him. Years passed, and Lysandros continued his quiet conversations with the shifting shapes. People eventually stopped questioning it, accepting that a man who made such gentle pottery might also live in gentle company. And truthfully, his workshop always felt unusually peaceful. When storms came, the wind seemed to avoid his windows. When summer heat stifled the village, his shop stayed cool. The shadows inside never felt heavy or sharp, just present. One evening, something changed. Lysandros was shaping a tall vase when the lantern flame dipped suddenly, though there was no draft. The shadows in the room lengthened all at once, as if taking a deep breath. The potter paused, hand still on the clay. Then he smiled. "Ah," he murmured, "it's you." Petros, now older and delivering a basket of figs from his mother, felt the hair on his arms rise, not with fear, but with a curious sense of expectation. A darker shape stretched near the far corner, not ominous, just deeper, like ink swirled into water. It moved, slowly, softly, across the wall, stopping beside the potter's wheel. Lysandros bowed his head respectfully. Petros stepped back, heart thumping, but Lysandros reached out a calming hand. "It's all right," he said gently. "Some shadows are just very old stories who forgot they once had voices." The shape lingered, touching the vase's outline with a faint flutter like a breeze you feel only inside your imagination. The clay shifted, just slightly, as though approving. When it faded back into the corner, Lysandros whispered, "Thank you." Petros felt a strange warmth bloom in his chest. The potter turned to him. "See?" Lysandros said with a soft smile. "Everything speaks. Some things choose shadows to do it." After that night, the villagers noticed something small, but undeniable. The pottery from Lysandros' shop carried a quiet calm, as though shaped with an extra pair of invisible hands. People said drinking from his cups made dreams smoother, and bowls he made never cracked in winter. No one ever knew what truly visited the potter that evening. Lysandros never explained, and Petros never found the right words to ask. But sometimes, late at night, when the moon hung low and the village slept, the shadows in that old workshop are stretched just a little farther, as if listening, waiting for their old friend to speak again. Some myths don't shine, some don't roar, some simply rest in the corners of rooms where the light doesn't bother them, carrying stories for those who know how to listen. And now, with the night getting deeper and the world getting quieter, we're ready for the next gentle chapter. If your eyes feel heavier now, that's just the story settling in. This next tale drifts upward, slowly, lightly, toward the sky, the way an ember rises from a quiet fire. You don't have to focus. You can simply let it wash over you like a warm night breeze, high above ancient Greece. Long before poets wrote of constellations and long before sailors steered by the stars, there was a little one named Lycon. Not a powerful star, not a guiding light, just a small, steady glow tucked between brighter brothers. Lycon was content with his dim radiance. He wasn't interested in blazing trails across the heavens or being worshipped as a sign from the gods. He mostly enjoyed watching the world turn. Fields shifting from green to gold, waves tracing slow spirals along the shore, lanterns flickering in distant villages. From the sky, humanity looked peaceful, even when it wasn't. But stars, like mortals, had duties, and Lycon had one task he was expected to fulfill eventually. He had to fall, not violently, not tragically, just gently. Every star at some moment drifted down to earth in a soft streak, becoming a wish, a blessing, or a story. Some fell near mountains, some near rivers, some into seas where fishermen mistook their splash for playful dolphins. Lycon, however, hesitated. He wasn't afraid. He simply felt he wasn't finished watching yet. Every night brought a new detail: a shepherd lighting a lantern, children chasing fireflies, a pottery maker smoothing clay with such care it made starlight pause. There was always something worth one more look. The other stars teased him gently. "You're glowing slower again, Lycon." At this point, mortals will think you're part of the moon. But Lycon only hummed softly, enjoying the rhythm of the spinning world. One evening, though, he noticed something unusual. A young woman sat alone on a hillside, hands folded around her knees, staring at the sky with a look so tired it seemed she carried whole winters behind her eyes. Her name was Alera, though Lycon didn't know that yet. All he knew was that her gaze kept drifting toward him, steady and searching. Mortals often looked up, of course, but rarely with that kind of quiet longing. Night after night, Alera returned to the hill. Sometimes she brought a small loaf of bread. Sometimes she brought nothing but an old cloak and sat shivering in the breeze. But she always looked up at Lycon, never the brighter stars, never the ones lined neatly in the familiar shapes, only him. One windless night, when the sky glittered like polished bronze, Lycon felt a tug, soft, warm, familiar, a mortal's wish, not one spoken aloud, just breathed. Wishes asked softly were often the truest, and because he was a small star with no grand destiny, he listened carefully. Alera wished for peace, not success, not riches, not romance or glory, just peace, a quiet she could rest inside. Lycon pulsed faintly, a tiny gentle glow almost embarrassed by its own softness. Other stars would have known what to do next. They would have begun their descent, streaking across the sky in a blaze of silver, offering the mortal a beautiful, unforgettable sight. But Lycon hesitated. He wasn't ready to fall. He wasn't sure he'd be enough. But he also couldn't ignore the wish that drifted up from the earth like a sigh. For many nights, he thought about it. If stars think at all, it's in the way of flame flickers thoughtfully. He watched Alera, saw how she returned faithfully, even when snow dusted the hills, even when the moon hid behind clouds. She always sought the little star that hadn't yet found its courage. And slowly, Lycon realized that maybe falling wasn't an ending, maybe it was a meeting. One early spring night, when the air smelled faintly of rain and the ground still remembered winter, Alera climbed the hill again. She lay down on the grass, cloak tucked under her head, and whispered to the sky in a voice almost too quiet for even a star to hear. "If anything out there listens, I just want one gentle thing." Lakon brightened, not dramatically, not brilliantly, just enough. Alara blinked in surprise, sitting up slowly as the small star she'd watched for months shimmered more strongly than ever before. Then Lakon moved. Stars don't fall quickly, not the ones who take their time. He drifted downward like a glowing petal, almost floating on invisible currents. His descent left a soft ribbon of silver through the air, thin enough to feel private, as though the sky were whispering only to her. Alara gasped quietly. The star landed gently at her feet. No fire, no heat, just a warm pulse of soft, living light nestled in the grass. It flickered like a small heartbeat. Lakon didn't speak, of course. Stars rarely did, but Alara felt something settle in her chest. The kind of stillness that comes after long tears or a long walk or a long silence, finally understood. She cupped her hands around the tiny star, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. The next morning, villagers found her smiling faintly in her sleep, cloak wrapped around a small bundle of light that faded with the sunrise. They said she dreamed peacefully from that night on, as if someone had replaced her burdens with something softer, something steady and warm. And sometimes, when the sky was clear, villagers noticed a tiny new star glowing just above their hills, quiet, small, and very patient. Some said it was Alara watching over them. Others said it was Lakon finding his way home again. Perhaps it was both. Some myths don't shout. Some don't warn or teach. Some simply settle beside a tired heart and glow. And now that we've drifted among stars, let's fold back down toward Earth, where another gentle tale is waiting. If your breath has grown quieter and your shoulders have eased even a little, you're exactly where this story wants you. This next tale moves like morning light slipping under a door, gradual, warm, almost shy. You don't need to follow every detail. Just let it drift around you. The way sunlight drifts through tree branches at sunrise. In a quiet valley tucked between two low mountains, there lived a girl named Thessa. Not a hero, not a chosen one. She was known mostly for carrying baskets of figs to the village square and singing softly to herself on the walk home. A simple life, the kind that rarely finds its way onto scrolls or into songs. But every morning, long before the roosters crowed and long before the mist lifted from the grass, Thessa was awake. She slipped out of her small cottage, wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, and walked toward the eastern ridge with a small ceramic jar in her hands. Villagers noticed she always returned from those early walks with a warm glow on her cheeks. Not the flush of climbing a hill, but something softer, like she'd stood near a fire that only she could see. Some whispered that she met a secret lover. Some believed she prayed in solitude. Others said she collected herbs that grew only at dawn. But none of those were true. Thessa collected the light itself. As strange as it sounds, ancient Greece had many moments when ordinary people brushed up against the divine in small, gentle ways. For Thessa, it happened one morning when she was hardly more than a child. She'd wandered to the ridge before sunrise, long before she understood what made the world turn gold each morning. She sat in the grass and hummed a quiet tune, tracing circles with her finger in the dew. Then, as the horizon brightened, she noticed something she had never seen before. A faint ribbon of pale light drifting low along the ground, as if the dawn had arrived early and lost its way. Curious, she reached out. The ribbon curled around her fingers like silk. It wasn't hot, merely warm, like holding someone's hand on a cool morning. It pulsed once, like a heartbeat that wasn't trying to hide. Thessa gasped. The ribbon tightened slightly as if greeting her, and then drifted upward, weaving itself back into the first rays of sunlight. From that day on, dawn seemed to know her. The light gathered where she sat, forming small curls and tendrils that swayed around her like shy companions. Eventually, she learned, experimentally, gently, that if she carried a small jar with her, she could gather a little of that early glow. Just a pinch. Not enough to change the world, not enough to spark miracles, but enough to warm her cottage, enough to brighten the darkest winter mornings, enough to soothe children frightened by storms. Word spread slowly. A neighbor with aching joints asked if Thessa could bring a jar of dawnlight to ease the stiffness in her hands. Thessa agreed, and by evening, the woman said her fingers felt as if they'd been kissed by spring. Another villager, whose baby cried each night without rest, received a tiny jar of morning glow. The child slept through the whole night for the first time, but Thessa never charged for the jars. She never treated them as magic. She simply offered them like flowers or bread, small gifts from a small life. One day, however, the valley changed. Clouds rolled in thick and heavy, settling over the mountains like damp wool. Days passed with no sunrise visible, just dim gray light. People grew restless. Fields drank too much water. Laundry never fully dried. But Thessa noticed something different, something subtle. The jars she carried to the ridge remained empty. No matter how early she woke, no matter how patiently she waited, dawn would not form its usual ribbons. It stayed far beyond the clouds, distant, unreachable. She felt a pressure she'd never felt before, not from the villagers, but from within. She didn't want people to worry. She didn't want anyone to fear the dark. So she continued to climb each morning, even when the rain bit her skin and wind tore at her shawl. On the 7th morning, she reached the ridge and found something unexpected. A figure sat on a stone, tall and slender, wrapped in a cloak the color of early light. Their face was soft, but not human, more like the shape of a flame taking the suggestion of a face. Golden threads glimmered through their hair, and their skin seemed made of pale fire. Thessa froze. "You've been calling," the figure said gently, "so I came." She bowed instinctively. "I didn't mean to call anyone. I only wanted to help." "That's exactly why I came." The figure stood, and the clouds trembled, trembling like curtains being gently pulled aside. "I am Eos's hand, the one who carries the first glow of day, and for days now, the world has been too heavy for the light to find its way through." Thessa swallowed. "What can I do?" "You've already done it," the dawn spirit said. "You carried light when the world was dim. Now you must let the light carry you." Before she could ask what that meant, the spirit touched her jar. It filled instantly, not with a glow, but with something softer, warmer, a light that didn't come from the sky but felt like it came from inside her own breath. Thessa blinked. "This isn't dawn light." "No," the spirit said. "This is your light, the one you've been giving away for years." The jar glowed gently, casting gold across her hands. Not blinding, not holy, just kind. The spirit smiled faintly. People don't need the dawn to feel hope. They need someone who remembers what hope looks like. And then, like mist touched by rising sun, the spirit vanished. The clouds lifted by afternoon. The valley brightened. But from that day on, Thessa's jars glowed softly even in the deepest winter, even when storms swallowed the hills. Not because she captured dawn, but because she had once carried it in her. Some myths aren't about gods helping mortals. Some are about mortals reminding the gods what gentleness looks like. And now, as you sink deeper into rest, another story waits. One about a river that refused to forget. If your breathing has softened by now, and the world around you feels a little farther away, that's exactly right. This next story moves like water, steady, patient, carrying memories the way a river carries light. In the heart of Greece, between villages so small they barely had names, there flowed a river called Atere. It wasn't wide, it wasn't deep, it didn't roar through gorges or carve dramatic canyons. It simply moved, day after day, like a thought that never broke its rhythm. But Atere had something no other river claimed. It remembered, or at least that's what the villagers said. They believed that if you whispered your name into the water, the river would hold it for you. Not forever, just long enough to return it when you needed it most. Some said Atere remembered more than names. It remembered the weight of worry, the shapes of sorrows, the warmth of joys. And when you touched its surface, it touched something quiet inside you, as if offering to carry a bit of what you couldn't. For hundreds of years, the people treated the river gently for that reason. They washed their clothes upstream so the water stayed clear. They built small reed boats and set tiny candles afloat during festivals, and they forbade anyone from throwing refuse into it. A river that remembers must not be burdened, their elders said. One spring, a young man named Amon arrived in the village after a long winter on the road. His clothes were worn thin. His sandals were frayed. His face carried the tiredness of someone who had walked farther than he'd planned, not because he was adventurous, but because he had nowhere left to go. He was quiet, polite, and grateful for the villagers' kindness, but his eyes stayed hollow, as though he lived in two places at once, the village where his body walked, and a grief so large it cast its own shadow behind his thoughts. The villagers didn't pry. They offered him food, a place to sleep, work, repairing roofs, and carrying grain. But not even the warmest hearth or the kindest smile could stir him. One evening, an old woman named Callista watched Amon sit alone by the riverbank, elbows on his knees, head bowed. She approached slowly, lowering herself onto the grass beside him with the creak of old bones. "You know," she said gently, "Atere listens better than most of us." Amon managed a faint smile. "What would I tell it?" "Your name," she said. "Start with that." He looked at the water, soft ripples glowing gold with the last light of day. "Why?" "Because when you lose yourself," she said, "something should know how to call you back." Amon didn't answer. The river whispered as it passed, tiny waves brushing the rocks like fingertips. Finally, quietly, he leaned forward. "My name is Amon." The water carried the syllables away as though storing them. Callista patted his shoulder and left him there, the river murmuring softly beside him. Days passed. Amon continued to work in the village, but something small had changed. He sat by the river in the evenings now, not speaking, just listening. Sometimes he dipped his hands in the water. Sometimes he let the current carry fallen leaves past his feet. One morning, as the sun began to warm the valley, Amon followed the river farther downstream than he'd gone before. He walked until the village sounds faded and only the water remained. Steady, bright, alive. At a certain bend, Amon stopped. He wasn't sure why. The river slowed there, deepening into a pool so clear it looked like a piece of sky had fallen and forgotten to leave. Amon knelt at the edge. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The river moved differently, not quickly, not loudly, just with intention. A single ribbon of water curved toward him, brushing his fingertips. A whisper rose. Not a voice, not a sound, just a feeling, like someone calling him by name, gently, lovingly, like a mother waking a child from a nightmare. He gasped. The river wasn't repeating his name, it wasn't echoing it, it was holding it, as if to say, "You are still here. Come back to yourself." Amon's breath shook. His hands trembled. Tears fell without him trying to stop them. Not painful tears, just release, the kind that leave the chest lighter afterward. He whispered into the water again, "Amon," and the river answered again, not in echoes, but in recognition. He closed his eyes, and the memory he had been running from all winter rose inside him, finally ready to be touched. The face of someone he had loved and lost. The ache he had carried until it nearly hollowed him. The guilt of surviving when they did not. The sorrow didn't vanish. The river couldn't erase what had happened, but it held the part of him he had abandoned in his grief. When he opened his eyes, the water shimmered softly, like morning light through tears. The river released his name gently, letting it drift away downstream, not to forget it, but to return it to him later, when he needed it again. Amon walked back to the village with a straighter spine, not healed, not whole, but found. And from that day on, he visited the river each dawn, greeting it like an old friend. The villagers noticed that Amon's laughter eventually returned. Soft at first, then brighter. He stayed in the village for years, becoming part of its heartbeat, the way some people become fixtures without trying. And Atere, the quiet river, remembered him, just as it remembered countless others who whispered their names into its gentle hands. People say that even now, if you visit that valley and bend near the water's edge, you might feel a small pulse beneath the surface. Not a current, not a fish, not a trick of imagination. Just the river remembering someone who once forgot themselves and finally found the way back. Some myths don't warn or dazzle or frighten. Some simply remind you that you exist. And as the night deepens further, another sleepy tale drifts closer, this one carried by the hum of ancient stones. Our next story moves even slower than the river. It sits, it watches, it waits. Some myths are made of battles and gods, and some are made of patience. In the mountains of Arcadia, where clouds brush the treetops and shepherds still talk to stars, there was once a stone unlike any other. Not because it shone or floated or glowed. It didn't. In fact, it looked painfully ordinary. Dark gray, smooth, round enough to fit in two hands. Most people walked past it without noticing. But the old families of Arcadia knew the truth. This stone held a promise between two people separated by time, and the mountain Cerinthos, was said to be keeping that promise until it was finally fulfilled. Long ago, before city walls rose and temples gleamed across Greece, there lived a young woman named Thalia. She was a potter's daughter, quiet, contemplative, more in love with the shapes of shadows than the noise of human life. Her greatest joy was walking along the mountain ridge at dawn, bringing clay jugs her father had made to sell in the valleys below. It was during one of these walks that she met him, Orion, a shepherd. He wasn't remarkable in the usual ways. He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't poetic. He didn't come from wealth. But he had a kindness in him that felt rare. When he laughed, it sounded like someone opened a window after a long winter. Thalia liked that laugh. They began meeting at the mountain's edge, where a certain flat stone overlooked the valley. They'd sit there, sometimes speaking, sometimes saying nothing at all. Some people connect through words, others through presence. Thalia and Orion belonged to the second kind. One evening, as dusk painted the hills purple and the cicadas hummed their endless song, Orion said, "If you ever need me, Thalia, come here. I will always return to this stone." She smiled, shy, warm. "You promise?" He nodded. "With everything I am." It was a simple vow, so simple neither understood its weight. Seasons turned. Years passed. Their meetings became the center of Thalia's life. But Arcadia was changing. A new lord took power, stern, ambitious, eager to expand his lands. He conscripted shepherds, craftsmen, potters, any man who could carry a spear. Orion was taken. Thalia watched him disappear into the ranks of young men marching away, each wearing the same dull fear in their eyes. He turned once on the road and pressed his palm to his heart. She understood. "Wait for me, at the stone." And she did. She returned to their stone every sunrise, then every sunset, then both. At first she believed he would return any day. Then she told herself he would return any month. Then she whispered, any year. But the years stacked like forgotten pottery in her father's workshop. Rumors drifted in like wandering ghosts. A battle in the north, a winter raid, a commander lost, many men killed. But no one spoke Orion's name. Thalia refused to stop waiting. She carved tiny marks into the stone, one line for every month he didn't return. Rain softened them. Wind smoothed them, but she carved again. One night, after 20 years of waiting, she pressed her cheek to the stone and whispered, "If you return after I'm gone, remember me here." And that was the final mark she carved. The next morning, Thalia's footprints led up the path to the stone. They never led back down. No one found her, no one saw what happened. But the old families of Arcadia insisted the mountain took her gently, as mountains sometimes do, into its folds of wind and silence. The stone remained, and the promise remained with it. Generations passed, shepherds changed, villages rose and crumbled, wars came and ended, and still the stone waited. Some claimed that on certain mornings when the fog hung thick and the air felt like held breath, you could see a figure standing beside it, a man with weathered hands and torn sandals, turning slowly as though searching for someone he had loved before memory was even written. They said he whispered her name. They said the mountain carried it through the valleys. And they said the stone warmed beneath his touch, as though remembering the girl who had once carved tiny, hopeful lines across its surface. No one knows whether Orion truly returned. Myths don't always give answers. Sometimes they hold questions the way stones hold heat after sunset. But locals still swear that if you sit on that smooth gray stone at dusk, you'll feel a warmth that has nothing to do with the day's sunlight. A warmth that feels like waiting, like devotion, like a promise never broken, just delayed. And if you close your eyes, you might hear the faintest whisper carried on the mountain wind. I'm here. Whether it's hers or his, no one can say. But in a world full of noise, few things are more comforting than a myth that sits beside you quietly and simply stays. If you're lying back now, eyes half closed, this is the perfect moment for our next myth, because this one is about sleep itself, not as a feeling, but as a visitor. The ancient Greeks believed that sleep wasn't just something that happened to you, it was someone. A quiet god named Hypnos, gentle as dusk and soft as a closed window on a windy day. His twin brother Thanatos was the god of peaceful death, but the two were nothing alike. Thanatos was still as shadow. Hypnos was warm as evening air. Some poet said Hypnos lived in a cavern where sunlight never entered, where the river Lethe ran slow enough to make stones forget they were stones. Others said he drifted in the folds of night like an unseen bird, touching eyelids with feathers of dream. But the villagers in a small region of Thessaly told a different story, one far quieter and strangely human. They said that long ago, during a time of drought and restlessness, Sleep himself walked the earth. He did not take the form of a god. He came as a traveler, a young man in a dark cloak, barefoot, gentle of voice, arriving at the borders of a village that had forgotten how to rest. The harvest had failed that year. Wells dried, tempers sharpened. No one slept more than a few hours at a time. Even the children tossed in their beds like leaves caught in troubled wind. It was said the sky itself refused to dim fully at night, as though even darkness was too tired to settle. The traveler entered quietly, carrying nothing but a small wooden bowl carved with swirling patterns. People barely glanced at him, too exhausted for curiosity. But a little girl named Myra noticed him. She was 7, with hair that curled like question marks. As though she was always wondering something, she approached him shyly, tugging on the edge of his cloak. "Mister," she whispered, "why do your steps make no sound?" The traveler smiled with his eyes. "Because heavy things do not belong to me." She thought about that, though she didn't understand it. "Are you hungry?" she asked. "A little," he said gently. She took his hand, unafraid, as children often are when adults have forgotten how, and led him to her home, where her mother tried her best to offer hospitality despite her own sleeplessness. Bread was crumbled from dryness. Water tasted like dust. But the traveler ate with gratitude. Afterward, he stood in the center of the village square, looking around at the tired faces, the trembling hands, the lids that fluttered but never closed. "What do you seek?" an old shepherd asked him. "We have nothing left to give." "I seek only to help," the traveler answered. He lifted the little wooden bowl. Inside it was nothing anyone could see. But when he tilted it, a faint shimmer passed over the rim like the glint of moonlight on water. The villagers leaned in. "This," he said softly, "is the last drop of true rest." A murmur spread. "Rest?" a woman whispered. "We lost it months ago." The traveler nodded. "Yes, I know. That's why I came." He knelt and placed the bowl at the base of the dry village fountain. The stone there was cracked, but where the bowl touched it, a coolness rippled outward. The air gathered itself, The wind softened. One by one, villagers felt something inside them unclench. A man dropped the bundle of wood he'd been clutching all day. A mother stopped shaking long enough to breathe. A child yawned so deeply she fell asleep standing, her father catching her before she toppled. Myra tugged the traveler's hand again. "Are you doing this?" He gently turned to her. "No, you are." She blinked. "Me?" "You and everyone here. Sleep only comes when it's invited." And then, like mist dissolving, he began to fade. Myra panicked. "Will you come back?" The faint shape of the traveler knelt, his voice now more breeze than sound. "I come every night, to every place, but tonight, you remembered how to call me." He pressed a single finger to her forehead, and Myra's knees buckled, sinking her into the warmest slumber she had known in months. By dawn, the traveler was gone, but something lingered. The nights grew cooler. Dreams returned to the villagers like long-lost friends. The sky remembered darkness again, and the fountain, long dead, began to fill with fresh water, clear, cold, reflecting the faces of those who finally found rest. No one ever found the wooden bowl. Some said it became part of the fountain. Others said the traveler carried it to the next sleepless village. But Myra always insisted it was simpler than that. Sleep lives where we let ourselves be gentle. And in Greece, long before the world grew noisy and restless, people understood that myths didn't just explain the world. Sometimes they reminded people how to breathe. Since you followed the stories this far, we can take things even slower now. Let your shoulders drop a little. Let the breath loosen in your chest. This last myth is small, like the spark of a candle. The kind of story ancient Greeks told to children when night pressed close and the fire dimmed. It begins not on the earth, but in the sky, long before humans charted constellations or whispered names into the dark. The stars had their own lives, their own moods, their own quiet duties. Some were fierce guardians, blazing bright to keep the night from swallowing the world. Others were wanderers, drifting across the heavens with no destination, carrying long-forgotten tales. And then there was one star, a very small one, who had no duty at all. Not yet. Her name was Lycae, which meant glimmer, though she barely glimmered at all. She wasn't bright enough to guide sailors, nor steady enough to mark seasons. She didn't roar like comets or dance like meteors. She simply existed, soft and unnoticed, tucked near the edge of the Milky Way like a shy thought. While other stars lived in their blazing purpose, Lycae did something curious. She listened. She listened to the world below, to crickets whispering in summer fields, to quiet tears on lonely nights, to the steady heartbeat of oceans washing up against ancient cliffs. She listened to shepherds on cold hills, telling their sheep stories just to pass the time. She listened to mothers humming lullabies. She listened to the hush of people falling asleep after long days. No one knew she was listening, not even the moon. One night, as Greece slept in a soft silver glow, Lycae heard something unusual, something she had never heard before. A boy's voice, young, small, speaking not to the sky, not to gods, but to her, though he didn't know it. "I can't sleep," he whispered. His name was Damon, a child living in a tiny village tucked between two quiet hills. He wasn't afraid exactly, just lonely. His father was a potter who worked late. His mother had passed into the underworld when he was too little to remember her voice. The nights felt long in that cottage of clay walls and creaking beams. And so Damon whispered to the darkness, hoping someone, anyone, might hear him. A star did. Lyca tilted herself ever so slightly, straining to catch each word, each breath. She had no power over dreams. That belonged to the gods. She couldn't send visions or soothe nightmares, but she could do one thing. She could listen. Night after night, Damon spoke to the sky. "Today, I dropped the jug I made," he murmured once. "Do stars get lonely?" he asked another time. "I wish someone was awake with me," he whispered often. And though he never saw it, when he spoke, Lyca brightened, just a fraction, barely enough to notice. But she brightened all the same. Seasons changed. Damon grew. He learned to shape clay, to weave baskets, to laugh with other children. But still, on the nights when sleep felt far away, he whispered upward, not because he expected an answer, but because it made the darkness feel less empty. And still Lyca listened. Years passed the way years do, unexpectedly fast, like lanterns floating down a river. Damon became a young man, then a husband, then a father. His hands hardened, his voice deepened. But every now and then, when worries kept him awake, money, sickness, storms, he would step outside and speak to the night again. And Lyca, faithful and silent, listened. The world below changed. Empires rose and crumbled. New myths were born. Old ones were softened into dust. But Lyca remained small, steady, glowing gently over Damon's village. Until one night, many years later, Damon, now an elderly man with white hair and soft, shaking hands, stepped outside for the last time. The village was quiet, his family slept, and he looked up at the night sky with eyes that had seen nearly everything a life could offer. He whispered one more time, "Thank you, whoever listened." It was enough, more than enough, because in that tiny moment, something remarkable happened. For the first and only time in her long, quiet existence, Lyca flared bright, bright enough to be noticed, bright enough that shepherds looked up in surprise, bright enough that even the moon paused in her slow drifting, a single shimmering pulse of light. A star's way of saying, "I heard you." And then she dimmed again, returning to her soft glow, content with the only purpose she had ever needed, to listen. Today, if you look at the sky from a quiet hillside in Greece, or anywhere really, you might find a small, steady star near the edge of the Milky Way, not the brightest, not the largest, but constant. The old storytellers say it's Lyca, still listening, for the ones who can't sleep, for the ones who whisper into darkness, for the ones who simply want to be heard. And if you're listening closely, you might feel it too. A quiet warmth, a gentle presence, a star keeping you company through the night. Because some myths weren't meant to dazzle, some were meant to sit beside you softly until dreams finally arrive.